And actually hearing someone from the military say, I don't want more guns and tanks and soldiers, I want more renewables, because the thing that makes us safest is energy sovereignty. You can take out power stations, that's easy. But you can't take out wind turbines and solar panels. They're decentralized. So the single way for the UK to become safe in this depolarized, uncertain world is, this is from a military man, is to deploy renewables as fast as we physically can. So that was a really powerful testimony.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. It's our 272nd, but who's counting? I am. I'm Herb Simmons, author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future, and I'll be your host and moderator today. Many of us who recognize that the climate crisis is truly an emergency believe that if key decision makers, elected officials, their advisors, influential interest groups truly understood the true extent and magnitude of the crisis, they would see that emergency action isn't optional, it's essential. Today, I'm delighted to have with us Nick Oldridge from the United Kingdom. Nick, along with his brother Simon, has essentially put this theory to the test by organizing what they have called the National Emergency Briefing, held November 22nd of last year at Central Hall, Westminster, which is a historic hall in the heart of London. It brought together over 1,200 people, politicians, members of parliament, leaders from business, culture, faith, sport, media, and more. Leading UK experts presented the latest evidence on how both the climate and the nature crisis is already impacting health, food, security, the economy, and beyond. This straightforward and powerful idea of briefing national leaders directly with unvarnished science is astonishingly rare in most countries. We'll discuss with Nick how the idea emerged, what it took to make it happen, key points and messages from the briefing, and what's next, both in the UK and elsewhere. As always, our program features our two regular expert panelists, Dr. Peter Carter from British Columbia. Hello, Peter. Peter is a
Hello,
retired
everyone.
medical doctor who founded the Climate Emergency Institute and has served as an expert reviewer for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Joining Peter is Paul Beckwith. Paul is a climate systems scientist from Ottawa, Canada. Paul, you've taught at a number of universities and you host a popular and prolific YouTube channel on all aspects of the climate crisis that has been seen by over 11 million people. Stick around to the end, though, when we'll highlight what we call our Climate Five, the five biggest climate stories of the past week, each presented in 1 minute or less. We always appreciate your support. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends and family, view our website at Climate Emergency Forum, one word, .org, and consider making a donation to keep us going. We'd also love your comments and suggestions for future programs. Nick, thank you so much for being here. I know how incredibly busy you and your brother must be with all the follow-up, the plans, the ideas, the inquiries pouring in from around the UK and the world about the national emergency briefing. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to join with us today. So to get us started, just tell us a bit about yourself, how you and your brother came to organize such an impactful event, what exactly the climate emergency briefing was and is, and what you hope it will accomplish. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And hi there. Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here. So how did this happen? Well, my brother and I are both climate campaigners. So that is maybe a coincidence, but we used to run a business together many years ago. So we used to be in manufacturing and we fired ceramic tiles, clay roof tiles. And I think that was our in to understanding climate, because even back in the early 2000s, there were conversations about carbon, reducing emissions, and but it was quite an industry thing. And I think that was the sort of gateway that made us become people who were quite aware. We both moved down to Devon, where I am now, in the southwest of the UK, to live a sort of more rounded life, but just started working on different campaigns. My day job became climate science translated, an effort to link climate science with the public through the medium of comedy. So we made one in the US this year with David Cross, and essentially we take the climate scientist, in this case it was Michael Oppenheimer, and we get the comedian to make jokes out of the difficult science and the difficult truths that people don't really would prefer not to listen to. That was dominating my full time, and my brother announced to me early in the year that he was thinking of looking at the concept of a COVID style briefing for climate. I think you over in the US, and I'm not sure about Canada, but there maybe was a different experience with COVID. But what happened for us is scientists, experts stood in front of podiums in very important looking rooms and explained in quite technical terms exactly what the pandemic was. They went into the detail, they went into the science. And I know that what happened after that in the UK, particularly, wasn't exactly how people should behave in a crisis like that. But certainly, just about the entire population listened, digested the information, and acted. And so my brother started suggesting that we need this, but we need it for climate. And initially, he was going to do it in a room you can hire essentially close to the Houses of Parliament for about 100, 200 MPs, so policymakers. And he turned to me one day and said, you know what? I think that's the wrong way of doing it. I think we need other people to witness what the MPs are told in the room, but from across all aspects of society. So what I'm going to do is hire Westminster Central Hall. Herb, you have very clearly sounded like you know where that is. I didn't at the time, and I looked it up. I looked it up, and it's where the first ever UN meeting took place in 1946. It's a really majestic, impressive building with this incredible interior, and it's about 2 minutes walk from the Houses of Parliament. Once he told me that, I said, "Look, you can't do this on your own. We're going to have to team up." So effectively, we teamed up. Then the next development was I work with a creative duo called the Utopia Bureau, who are the creatives behind Climate Science Breakthrough, my comedian the climate effort. And we brought them in because it was all about how we pitch it. How are we going to cut through and be treated seriously? Because effectively, we're saying we want to put on a briefing that is a little bit like the government. So we're saying we want to be a bit like the government. Therefore, all our branding, our tone, everything about what we did, we crafted around a message so we looked and sounded that we had a really high level of authority and we're almost the government. We didn't quite pretend to be the government, but it was leaning so far into that I think some people may have thought we were. And that venue and that authority that we delivered through all the branding and the way we presented it, I think allowed us to then build this movement that seemed to sort of take place after that. We pulled in the experts that we knew from our campaigning, some we didn't, but we mostly knew who we wanted. And we were quite certain that we didn't want this to be another climate conference or another nature conference, because as I'm sure you will all have seen, they're generally very specific, very technical, and don't really get reported outside climate circles. What we wanted to do is something that was altogether different, that cut through to people who wouldn't normally come to a climate conference. And we didn't want to present it in the way that climate data is often presented from a global perspective. It might be different in the US, but certainly here in the UK, we'll get global data. We'll have specific issues like sea level rise or methane or very specific. Instead, what we wanted to do was boil it down to the impacts and the risks and how they relate to life in Britain. And to do that, we covered this quite broad level of subjects. So, of course, we had climate and nature, nature often getting left out. So, we very purposely started with nature. That was the first briefing. But then we moved on to health and food and national security and economics. I think those subjects were the ones that really made this something different. I think, the majority of people do not understand that as the crisis develops, having running out of food for us in the UK could be a serious issue and not an unlikely one. So that was quite a shocking presentation. Also laced with positivity, because if we move to something that's plant rich, we in the UK, for example, with a plant rich diet, would free up an area of land the size of Scotland that can be used for nature recovery. So there's a theme actually. All our stories hard on the brutal, scary truths, but also we try to have a narrative that moved to the positives by the end. But again, the same with health. We had a very esteemed doctor, Hugh Montgomery, Professor Hugh Montgomery, who is an ICU doctor and highly trusted for his profession and for the way he delivers. So hearing him talk about why this is an emergency and talking about climate from a perspective of health, not from a perspective of CO2, etc. So we had this really broad range of talks. We had Mike Berners-Lee, who's a very well-known professor who has a very broad understanding of all climate issues, as, if you like, the chairman. And we opened it with a broadcast of Chris Packham with the objective of getting, interest from the press and the parliamentarians. And then we embarked on this mission to get people into that hall. Now, the lower part of the hall is about 700 seats. If you take the upper circle, it goes up to 1,400 or so. We managed to reach 1,200 something. And we just started this process of inviting people. But because this is literally a guy and his brother with two creative partners, but other people sort of jumping in, it became quite a challenge. So what we did quite earlier on was we appointed inviters. So people would pop up and say, "Hi, I'm deep in the finance sector, but I'm incredibly passionate about, connecting my colleagues with the climate reality that they just have has escaped them. Can I invite all these people on my list?" And we literally deputized those people and said, "You are now given permission to invite who you think you should invite." So we took a risk there. And we had people doing that for us in sport, in media, in music, in all sectors, insurance, banking. And then the other great effort was, how do you encourage policymakers to turn up at something? So that, I mean, that was a real challenge. I mean, we discovered only after we booked the hall that the budget never occurs in the UK in November, but they're going to hold a budget the day before. So that was a bit of a blow. But we used a specialist communications company, and then we just used leverage. We made personal invite videos for every single one of the 650 UK MPs using a bit of someone came to us with some fancy technological solution for that. But that meant that their constituents could write to them with their in-personal invite. So there was a lot of reaching into the constituencies of these, where these MPs are located, and persuading the residents who live there to call on their representative to attend. In the end, I think it's quite hard to measure because we waved them all in with their passes. We had around 100. Considering the budget and other circumstances, I think we were quite impressed with that. Yeah, and then the event's done, it's dusted, and now we're looking at what we do for the next phase.
Well, that's a remarkable story there. What hits me, and I guess to most people, it's as you say, it's two guys, two guys just said we're going to do it, and you made it happen. It doesn't require, more than some imagination and hard work and commitment. Hats off to you. Just one quick question I have, and then I'll turn it over to Peter and Paul. Did you attempt to try to get the attendees to fill out some kind of evaluation or otherwise have a mechanism to get feedback from the people who were there, both in terms of what they thought of the program and what they might do to advance it, et cetera, et cetera? Or is that still a possibility?
We no, we did, and to be honest, I don't know whether we totally examined all that data, but we put up a QR code at the end for people to
Mhm.
respond to. But what happened as soon as the briefing ended, it became this melee of people wanting to speak to other people because another dynamic, we tried to include celebrity in the event. So we had some famous actors and musicians there, again, as part of the effort to get the policymakers there. And so there was this huge sort of everyone wanted to go and talk to whoever they wanted to talk to. So
All right. Well, I'm sure Peter and Paul are eager to engage with you. So let's start with Paul. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an excellent endeavor that you did. It sounded like there was an awful lot of organization, months of organization, etc. I guess one of my questions is regarding your event, and Oxfam International just put out a report yesterday on billionaires essentially and inequality and the amount of control that billionaires have. You and I and many other climate communicators, we have this idea that we can communicate to the masses, and if we can get the masses to understand climate change, the problem, the risks that we're facing, then these masses can then go and force politicians to make policies to deal with the crisis. But in many countries, we're finding more and more control in many countries just goes to very few people. We're not really democracies so much, it's more oligarchies. So according to the Oxfam report, there's over 6,000 billionaires, and the top the richest 12 billionaires, mostly white men in the US who run social media or media enterprises, etc. They have the power and the voice that governments listen to. Have you kind of looked at who wields the power? Maybe it's different. Maybe the billionaires aren't controlling as much in the UK as they are in other places. But this Oxfam report, which came out just, of course, for Davos, and of course, Davos is going on in Switzerland. So, maybe we need to rethink who we're trying to communicate the message of climate change to in order to get policy change, because it's not happening the way we're doing it. Did you have billionaires that you know of at your meeting? I mean, people don't wear a sign on their forehead, I'm a billionaire, but still.
That's a very good question, and we need to find the not insane billionaires, don't we? No, very similar problems. So we have the British press, which is mostly owned by people with vested interests, almost fully owned, apart from maybe two exceptions, but only people on the left read those. And then we have our social media landscape is your social media landscape. So we're now at the mercy of Musk and Zuckerberg, and you can see that in the climate in terms of salience moving down the list and the amount of disinformation moving up the list. I mean, as an example, when we first launched our first climate comedy film in 2023, we instantly got 1 million views on then Twitter. And then people reached out to us, said, I want to share this, send me the video, and it exploded. And then when we launched the David Cross video this April, I think we had 10,000. And it's a completely different landscape. And so you had Twitter was an amazing ecosystem of people sharing data and discussing, it sometimes got little bit robust, but now it's just a hellscape. So all this is stacked against us. But I think what we felt we needed to do was the briefing was part one, if you like, and we needed to make that moment where we brought everyone together. Because one of the big missing pieces is people in industry, people with influence, people in business, people in banking, insurance. They are living under a little bubble of everything's all right and it's not that bad and climate's, for the next generation. And anyway, it won't affect the UK. So we needed to reach into those with influence, and we did that with this event. But as for the policymakers, yes, we knew we wouldn't get that many to attend. We got decent press, but the BBC didn't cover us, and we didn't get into the big newspapers, really. The next stage is we turn the briefing into a film. And the idea of that is we circumvent the oligarchy-owned media and social media by taking the film to every village hall, town hall, community centre across the country. And the reason why we think we can do this is because as we went along, we were very purposefully non-political and non-partisan. So we didn't say the climate policies should be this, this, and this, and this. We kept away from that. We're just trying to put the urgency back into it and the evidence back on the table with some ideas of where to go. And so this enabled us to build up this coalition of support by some very powerful NGOs in the UK. I don't know whether you've heard of them, but people like the National Trust. I mean, this is Middle England. People who don't normally talk about climate. The RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, very powerful NGO. All the faith groups came on board. Groups from the medical sector, unions, the Association of Councils, librarians, all these different sectors have come in. And so now, as we've started to discuss the film, we need help with distribution. People are saying, well, we'll show this to every single one of our groups across the country. The faith leaders came to us and said, we'd like to show this in cathedrals. And so we're going to have this film roll out from quite sort of fancy venues, if you like, to very modest ones. I have a little church in my village that is also a village hall. That we'll do a showing there for about 50 people. And the idea is that it's peer to peer, it's person to person. It gets us around that media issue. And also, I think delivering this information in person or discussing it, watching it, dealing with it together, that also lands better. And to every one of those showings, we're going to invite the MP, the policymaker. So we didn't get them all at the briefing. We were never going to get them all. But they are going to repeatedly get invitations to come and attend the screening. It's going to be hard for them to escape that when it's the local cathedral or church or community centre. And it will come from all kind of groups, from faith groups to union groups to business groups, the Quakers, everyone, if we can get them all on board, which is looking likely. And I think, because it's a very powerful point, because we put on probably the most impactful climate event that's happened in the UK, and we barely scraped the big media. I mean, we got lots of coverage for around the edges. So we know what we're up against, but we think by bringing it to communities, that is our way of getting to the MPs from the people that vote for them.
Sounds great. Do you have a sort of target release date that you're looking at, or is that sort of up in the air?
We're being asked this a lot, and I think we should have the answer soon, but around April. Fairly soon, yeah, because we've got this energy and it's an
Yeah,
extraordinary energy and we don't want to lose it.
momentum.
So we're trying to run to catch up. And we have our parliament goes into recess at the end of March. And then we have
Okay.
local elections, a bit like your midterms. We're trying to pitch it in the recess when the MPs are very receptive to what their voting population think.
It reminds me, my own background, I spent many years in state and local government here in the United States, and I know it's similar in Britain that the key is often to reach the right senior staff person to a politician. And I sort of cut my teeth on the British series Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister and
Yeah.
the Machiavellian influence of those behind the scenes. So I don't know if you have or will attempt to target the key advisors to these folks in addition to the ministers themselves.
I just
Uh,
want to say,
okay.
Peter and I are in Canada, so when you said our midterms, we're
Oh,
not
sorry.
part
Yeah,
of the US last time we looked. So
Yeah,
not
I'm
yet.
I'm the minority on this call. Charles and Heidi and Peter and Paul, they're all north of the border. I sort of
yeah.
envy them more than usual these days for reasons I won't go into. Peter, floor is yours.
Hello, Nick. It's more than a pleasure to meet you virtually, and hello to your brother. Yeah, what you pulled off, I think to all of us, was absolutely amazing. It's the sort of thing that we've been sort of dreaming of, right? But you did it. Of course, we're thinking and discussing, can we do what you did in our country? Can we do what you did in Canada? Well, I'm sure we could because we're not going through the terrible problems that are happening south of the border. I did note that you got quite a lot of media coverage, and I did note that it lasted for days. So when I noticed that, I thought, oh boy, this is huge. They were able to do that with the media. Also, I think a message for us is that to put on, organize, and head something like this on climate change needs somebody with a good business background. So I just want to pick out a few little things, no, the big things, that came from your report from the media. The climate conference process has failed. You focused on the economy, right, as well as security. You included in that food security. Apparently, you also said that institutions have a responsibility to ensure the public is involved. I've done a lot of work on that, so I know how true that is. And maybe in Britain, because of all the crop problems that you've had recently, maybe Britain will respond. So what do you think about other countries being able to duplicate it or at least use methods that you've used?
Well, I can share news on that actually, because it's been coming in thick and fast. I think we're up to about 10 countries that are seriously interested. But I think the one that will interest you and your listeners most is we've been speaking to Covering Climate Now. So we spoke to the founders, Mark and Kyle, and their view, they're quite resolute about this. Their view is they want three in the US, so one in California, one in Chicago, one in New York. They want, I think they said a couple in Canada. I don't remember there's a couple or one. And then they talked Mexico, Japan, India, and Brazil. And that's just so Covering Climate Now is a sort of that organization that, feeds into journalism around the world. And then we've had approaches from a team in Germany who are quite not advanced, but they're quite serious and want to put on a briefing in the Bundestag. We've got a meeting next week with the Netherlands and with Sweden. We have someone who wants to do the similar thing in Ireland and Scotland, which seems sensible. We have interest also from Norway and also from Brazil. We don't yet
Wow.
know what this means, but I think it means something. And obviously, the circumstances will be quite different in each country. For instance, the US team that we chatted to said, well, we clearly wouldn't try and pretend to be the government. That just wouldn't work for us. There'll be local differences, but I think it's clearly touched people in a way that shows possibility. I mean, one thing to share that the people in the room from the climate movement, they weren't our primary target. So I suppose people like yourselves, but what we found with those people, because they were all over LinkedIn writing long personal experiences and posting them, was really powerful testimonies from people who we thought might just dismiss us. But I think what was happening is they felt that finally everyone is hearing this evidence together for one. Finally, because we're all witnessing it together with such a group that covers such a wide range of society, they felt uplifted that now maybe finally something might happen. I think they were also very energized by the fact that we covered, like I said at the beginning, we didn't just cover CO2 or very, very particular aspects. We covered everything. Peter, you mentioned national security and food. They really had an impact. I mean, our former general who was doing the presentation on national security, many in the climate movement wouldn't think of inviting a military man to a climate event. But that certainly appeals to people from other sides of the political spectrum. And actually hearing someone from the military say, I don't want more guns and tanks and soldiers, I want more renewables, because the thing that makes us safest is energy sovereignty. You can take out power stations, that's easy, but you can't take out wind turbines and solar panels. They're decentralized. So the single way for the UK to become safe in this depolarized, uncertain world is, this is from a military man, is to deploy renewables as fast as we physically can. So that was a really powerful testimony.
The dream gets bigger and more amazing. Absolutely wonderful to hear that. I should say that, and you're probably aware of the fact that very recently, just over the past couple of years, there's a huge general backing off from climate change generally, and certainly climate action from the point of view of governments. I posted to me, a very alarming media report from Bloomberg recently on Sweden, of all countries, backing right off and not giving they have some huge renewable energy projects online being built, but they're not getting backing, so they're stuck. The Bloomberg article said that this is general across the continent, meaning across Europe. So this gave all of us a huge lift, a great lift. And listening to your plans and progress, this lift that you're providing us is going to carry on. One question, you mentioned the word risk, right? Climate science does not do risk. It's very, very rare to come across a paper that does. Interestingly, one of the very rare papers that did actually approach climate change with risk was from Tim Lenton just a few years ago. But generally, we see nothing about risk. And the IPC does not do risk. If there's an opposite to risk assessment, it's what the IPCC does. So thank you for that.
That's a point worth picking up on, because one of our advisors was a guy called Sandy Trust from the Institute of Actuaries. So these are the people, he's worked with Tim Lenton. So these are the people that define risk for the insurance industry, and they write these devastating reports. You've probably seen them. And I think those reports are probably some of the most powerful, like you say, almost more powerful than the science, because they speak to the finance people, they speak to the commercial people, they speak to the insurance people, because what they define is just not bewildering, it's terrifying, isn't it? 50% GDP loss by 2070, possibly. We had that input from there, but also the experts that we picked, we specifically chose them because they are comfortable moving into risk, like Tim Lenton and like Kevin Anderson. They're quite outspoken and are quite prepared to step out of their lane a little bit. The great challenge is how to get the science to be consumed by the public. And I think we were a little bit unfair just to assume that scientists not only have to do all the work and all the research and crunch all the numbers and work through all those theories, they also have to be responsible for communicating this to the wider public. And that isn't really equitable. And so we wanted scientists who were brave and pushed in that area, but we felt our role was to try and assist with that. They handed us all their transcripts and we gave input from a perspective of communications to try and make everything easily digested by people, more clear, and land in all the right ways from, as we understand the climate situation in the UK.
We did a program on the actuaries report a few months ago or so. I mean, because what was unique, as you know, about that report, and one of the reasons we featured it, is because it was a partnership between climate scientists from the folks at Exeter, Tim Lenton and his colleagues, and the actuaries who were, I mean, they're serious. It's like, do we have more than 2% risk of a company collapsing? If not, we need to blow the whistle. It was so refreshing, a decade later than we needed it, but just probably like the decade after we could have used the national emergency briefing, but we're not going to turn it down now. Have you thought about, or have folks come to you about seeing whether following up to connect what you're doing, particularly the film maybe, with the movement of citizen assemblies? I could see the film being part of the briefing for a citizen assembly. That's really something that's occurred much more in the UK and Europe than here in the United States. And it seems to me a potential powerful concept to get citizens directly involved in terms of policy advocacy with your amazing presentations, however presented as information for them.
Yeah, I think there is something there that could happen, but it might not be that we do that. So what we've had to, partly for our sanity, but also because we hold this non-partisan position, we need to have an end to where our role gets everyone to and others pick up. So we'll be passing the demand for action that we create will be getting handed to lots of different organizations to go and deliver. But the folk from XR have approached us saying we're thinking of wherever the film is shown, holding a people's citizens assembly
Oh, okay.
in that town shortly thereafter. There's certainly something in that, but I think it's worth saying something briefly about the film because the film is going to be quite different from the briefing because the briefing had the awe-inspiring majesty of the building and all the big names and famous people there, and it was quite hard hitting. And it was supposed to be because we're talking to people with responsibility and influence who should know and need to know. And that's how I'm sure that the National Security Council deliver threats like that to MPs all the time. But the film, when it lands in places like my little village hall stroke church in my village, is going to be reaching people who may have never really stepped into the world of climate. So we're going to have to adjust how we communicate that. And I don't know whether you have this in the US or Canada, but there's a TV show called Gogglebox where it's literally a show about people watching TV, but they're reacting. So they become characters in their own right and they're reacting to different clips. And so what we're going to do is take our broadcaster, Chris Packham, from the event, and he's going to host different people who are going to watch and experience clips from the briefings and then they're going to react to them. Some of them will be ordinary people and some of them will be famous faces. And then what we also did at the event, when the speakers weren't speaking, we grabbed them and took them into a mini studio. So we've recorded what they think about their work from a human perspective. So you've got Tim Lenton saying all the really scary stuff. And then you have Tim Lenton talking personally about why he does what he does and how it impacts him and how he feels as a human being doing that work. And that stuff is always important to help
Absolutely.
what you're saying land with people. So the film's going to have this it's going to have the content in there, but it's going to have this quite different feel to it as well.
Well, you're clearly given a lot of thought and come up with some ideas. Let me turn it back to Paul.
I just wanted to say that the Institute of Actuaries, they just published their fourth report in the last week. They're looking at the risks of what they say will be a likely 2 degrees Celsius world by 2050. If you look at the five temperature records, the biggest five groups, and there's a couple of additions to that, one from China and one elsewhere, but they're talking about passing 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial by 2037 and then 2.5 degrees by 2050. And the actuaries in the report say, we're likely to pass 2 degrees by 2050, and then they give all the implications of that. And one of the biggest things that stands out to me is we're going to head to a world that's not really insurable. Insurance is a huge part of modern civilization. Companies and governments say start big projects of infrastructure as long as they're insurable. So the public is very aware of what insurance is. They're very aware that their own rates on their houses, for example, may have doubled or tripled in the last 5 years. They're very aware that in some areas where they live, they can't actually even get insurance on their places. Rates for cars insurance is going way, way up. So it's really impoverishing a lot of people. And I think that could be a focus that extreme weather events around the world have accelerated so much. every 19 days we have $1 billion disaster on average in the US. And back in the
Wow.
80s, it used to be every 82 days. So this is an area where extreme weather is driving us to maybe a world where we can insure things in the future. I mean, you did have people talking about that at your event, but that's an aspect I think the average person can understand for sure.
It's certainly a relatable one. And actually, we didn't focus on insurance. I mean, in my last climate science translated film I did with David Cross, we made a whole series of gags about losing the ability to insure anything. And I think we did that very specifically because people can relate to it. It's part of your daily life, isn't it? So I think that's a
Yeah.
very good point.
Can you talk a bit more about the comedians and how that translation work is going? Because we're trying to translate science into easily understandable ideas on this channel, and I do that on my own video channel, trying to translate complex scientific papers, peer reviewed, to things people can understand. So the idea of comedians is excellent. In fact, I've signed up for a stand-up comedy course myself at my local comedy club. So I think it's very important to have a sense of humor in what we're doing. I love that work. I mean, I haven't seen all your comedy videos, but it's a great idea. Can you tell us a bit more about how you got involved in that?
That was my first step into taking some action. So obviously we ran this business together, my brother and I, and we were left financially comfortable. And when you map that against beginning to understand what the future could look like, it suddenly became a moment in time where I thought I can't remain an observer. I need to take something that I was going to leave to my children. My wife and I were going to leave to our children, and I need to use it in the here and now to get the future that we want and not the future that we're heading towards. It was actually one of the speakers from the briefing who I was watching. This is way back probably in 22, Kevin Anderson. And he was delivering one of those really impactful moments that just, goes right in here and leaves you in no uncertain terms that, we need to get serious. But the thought that struck me, because I've always worked in sort of marketing and communications, was this looks like something my son could have shot at university on his phone and sent to me because it looks like it's in a basement somewhere. This is bad. There's bad sound, bad lighting. It doesn't really, the setting that he's in doesn't really seem to meet the content that he's of the
The
words that he's saying.
seriousness, yeah,
The words that he's saying are the most important words on the planet right now. So why
Mhm.
isn't this this is what happened in my head. Why isn't this on the BBC or on some very serious documentary? Our entry into the US was with David Cross, and we now want to step it up a gear with someone more famous, so A-list comedian or comic actor. And we're starting the process of reaching out, which is a really tough process because it really comes down to who knows who knows who. If you or anyone listening has connections with the comic actors, comedians who have big followings or who are famous and who are going to be brave enough to step above the parapet, because that is a question, isn't it, at the moment, isn't it? But then we
Mhm.
would be very interested because we might work with Michael Mann, but we have climate scientists ready. Most climate scientists want to do these that we approach. And we have the funding there, and we have the script writing ability, and we have the production ability. What we need now is the famous face, which effectively ensures it's watched, and that's our promotional budget in a way. So anyone with any links, because you never know, these things tend to happen down to who someone is connected to, and that's how these things tend to get made. So that was my little request.
Well, that we hope that maybe some of our viewers are related to or know or live across the street from a famous comedian, and we certainly will do everything we can. And we know we had Sir David King on recently, and he talked about his relationship with UN Secretary General. I don't know if you've had contact with Sir David, but that may be an option to reach high levels at the UN with regard to promoting your work. I just have one last question sort of before we wrap up, and that's it's no secret for anybody watching our program that I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'll speak for myself and I think for Paul, that we are strong supporters of the need to aggressively investigate solar radiation management, geoengineering, direct climate cooling. And I saw, not surprisingly, you didn't have a subject, or I don't think that was mentioned. Did that come up at all in the discussions, and it was decided to stay away from it, or was that something that wasn't even on the radar?
Well, I don't think we paused long to discuss that one because, in a way, once you add all those briefings in, we were up to 9 and 10
Mhm.
with Mike Berners-Lee. So it was quite a crowded platform. I think the way things sit at the moment in the UK, we would be quite concerned about even though they should be looked at, about that being seen as the panacea and everyone pulls back and says it's okay. Because what's happening at the moment is we have a Labour government that came into power saying the right things about climate. So we're moving away from the very anti-climate government that we had before, thinking that we were going to see some comprehensive action. And it's all tied up in carbon capture, which for us is unproven. And I think that that development that's going on in the UK is coming with gas expansion. And as we understand it, gas is worse than coal, especially when we're importing LNG from over in the US. So when you see those kind of technological solutions laid down, what you tend to see in the UK, at least anyway, as people just pull away and go, we don't need to worry now. It's all going to be fine. So that wasn't something we wanted to step into.
No, I appreciate that. Well, let me thank you so much, Nick. You've been such you and I'm sure your brother are, there's so much fresh air that comes through across the ocean. So many new ideas, such a willingness to do what's so simple at some level and so obvious and so needed. You know that you have our support any way that we can help you. I'm a member of the Society of Environmental Journalists. I'll be going to their annual conference where Mark will be there and the covering climate folks will be there. I'd be happy to talk to them about helping to see what we can do to promote holding sessions or events here in the United States. And I'm sure my Canadian colleagues will do likewise. So again, thanks so much. And I'm going to segue now to what we call the sort of the Climate Five as we wrap up the program. A quick look at some of the key headlines, one or two of which we've already discussed in the program today. So first, just a couple days ago, and this is being recorded, I believe, on January 21st, a major United Nations report concluded that the world is facing what they call climate bankruptcy. Three-quarters of the population are now living in countries that are considered to be water insecure. 4 billion people, half the world's population, faces extreme water scarcity at least once a month. Much of this, not all of it certainly, is due to the kind of whiplash weather that climate change induces throughout the world or so. And that's true. There's almost no place that's immune or exempt for that. I would encourage our viewers to look at that report and see how it can work and is relevant to your own situation. Headline number two, climate story number two. A new study also just came out that showed that something like half of the world's carbon dioxide emissions come from just 32 fossil fuel companies. And of the top 20 of those companies, 17 are state-owned. And I think that's really important because those who are inclined to sort of see the oil industry as dominated by private sector capitalists need to face the fact that most fossil fuel management and exploration and distribution is from state-owned companies all over the world. And of course, that exacerbates the challenge of getting off of fossil fuels because so many countries depend upon the revenues. It would be no surprise, I'm sure, to anyone watching that every one of the countries that hosted one of those companies was against the effort at COP30 in Belém to propose a fossil fuel phase out. Number three, and this gets to the United Kingdom, Nick, and that is that the United Kingdom government has finally released its assessment of, quote, global biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and national security. I think that's what the report is called. Apparently, the report, from what I've read, was supposed to have been published in October of last year, but was blocked by the Prime Minister's office for whatever reasons. The report says that global ecosystem degradation and collapse threaten UK national security and prosperity, and every critical ecosystem, I believe this is a direct quote, is on a pathway to collapse. And it was produced by analysts not just from environmental agencies, but from national security and other agencies. And of course, you referred to that earlier, Nick, about the importance of getting national security as part of this conversation. The report also says, quote, nature is a foundation of national security or so. So I think that's very significant. We hope other countries will do that. And importantly, that you, Nick, and others can build upon that report for aggressive climate action. The fourth is what Paul mentioned earlier, so I'll just mention it very briefly, and that is the recently issued fourth in a series of reports by the actuaries and the University of Exeter in partnership with the Institute of Actuaries called Paracel Lost, which concluded that the world could lose up to 50% of the GDP in coming decades because of climate change. And it also talked about, as you did just now, Paul, what they called the end of insurability. as insurance is the invisible lubricant of the global economy, yet natural disasters have led to losses doubling in the last decade or so. If this continues, and there's no reason why it wouldn't continue absent aggressive climate action, many places will become simply uninsurable, leading to a total collapse of local economies. They're grim reading, but hopefully another wake-up call. And last, for those of you who watched our amazing program 2 weeks ago on the seabed curtain in Antarctica, I've been following closely, and I hope many of you have, the stories in the New York Times and elsewhere about the progress being made or lack thereof. And just 2 days ago, on Monday, the 19th of January, finally the clouds broke over the Doomsday Glacier, the Thwaites Glacier, and the helicopters, the two helicopters that were on the ship, were able to land on the glacier itself to set up their equipment, something like 17 tons of equipment. And they now will do something extremely dangerous, but extremely exciting in a way, and that is to drill down several kilometers, I believe, so that they can put probes that all go to the bottom of the glacier to measure ice loss in many different ways. This is an exciting project. They have only until February 7th when the ship has to head back to New Zealand. So I would encourage everybody to keep an eye on what they're doing. And if you haven't seen our program, you'll see one of the key scientists, one of the leading glaciologists in the world, Dr. David Holland, participate in our program direct from the top of the ship, just a few miles away from the Thwaites Glacier or so. So those are the Climate 5 for this week. I want to again thank you so much, Nick. We wish you all luck, you and your brother. We hope you'll come back and talk to us some more. Tell us what you've been happening. And as I said, any way that we can help and our viewers can help, we will do so. Thanks to Peter and Paul. And as always, we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.